Welcome to a special boxing scene on the road. That's right, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We got a big fight coming up tomorrow night. We're all doing our weigh-ins, fighter interviews, fun stuff like that. That's why you're catching us in our hotel room. It's Jimmy Smith alongside the champs, Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi. A fight we have not touched on this week. We've been saving it for today. Is a big heavyweight showdown. And when I say big, I mean literally big. That's right. Hrgovic, of course, versus Joe Joyce. Both guys weighing in gigantic. Joyce north of 270 weighing in. Hrgovic setting a new limit for his weigh-in as well in the 260s. Guys, two big heavyweights. One thing about heavyweights is one fight and you're right back in the mix. Chris, overall, what are you expecting from this fight and what these guys are going to bring?
Man, it's heavyweight, so of course I'm excited. I'm not like this fight ultimately doesn't matter that much in terms of the landscape of the division. Joe Joyce is coming off of those two bad losses to Zhilei Zhang. Hrgovic was stopped by Dubois. That was his last fight. So it's two guys who are looking to reclaim some land that they had at the heavyweight division. And but they're big guys, man. I actually am looking forward to this fight. You got two huge guys. They have a past together. They fought, I believe, in the amateurs and the World Series of Boxing a bunch of years ago. And they're both bigger. They're both have more experience in the pro ranks. So this will be a curious fight, mostly just because it's heavyweights. But in terms of the grander scheme of the top heavyweights in the world, neither one of these guys are considered that right now, even though Hrgovic was highly, highly rated until that loss to Dubois, and still has some life left in his career, I believe. But he's got to go out there and show us what he's got against Joe Joyce, who's seen better days. To put it nicely.
It's funny, guys. I'm looking at the heavyweight division this weekend, and it sort of is the fights that is like the bottom tier of the top. Still the top, but like a little bottom tier of the top. You got some people would say, "Oh, who cares?" But I think there actually could be fun fights, and I think Hrgovic and Joyce could be one of those kind of fights where it could turn out to be fun, even if it's not going to matter in the grand scheme of things. It's probably, if you're looking at it from a business perspective point of view, it's how will Hrgovic look in his return more than anything else. Because I think Joyce is pretty much looked at overall as shot by most of boxing. If you heard him talk, kind of say it to hear the way he talks. Recent run of form. Hrgovic hasn't had a recent run of form because he hasn't fought since the Dubois knockout, which was a shock in a lot of ways. A lot of people expect him to win that fight. So I think this fight is more the how will Hrgovic look in his return. And Joyce is sort of the name that you can kind of feed to Joyce, to Hrgovic, and see how he's going to look in that regard. And then you can sort of know where to place Hrgovic after the Dubois loss, because one thing he's got going in his favor is that Dubois has continued to do very well since the Hrgovic win. So at least if Hrgovic can come in and put on a performance against Joyce and blow him out of there or do what he's supposed to do, then okay, your one loss is against Dubois, and who's now a heavyweight champion. You can sort of be micromanaged back into the mix, since you were a pretty big part of the mix not long ago with the win over Zhang and so on and so forth. But I'll also mention the other heavyweight fight on the weekend, Jimmy, is, kind of the same thing, which Richard Torres and Guido Vianello, kind of the same thing. Like those outside kind of peeking in, but they're just on the outside. And so you might say, okay, it doesn't affect the grand scheme of affect the landscape in the grand scheme of things, but still two guys who can get together and put together a fun fight. Hey, you know what? Might as well maybe put the winners of both of these fights in against each other.
Well, another thing,
Champ,
Chris,
it's interesting you mentioned those two, because like they're not they're similar, but they're not, because with Guido and Torres, you got two guys who haven't been there. With Joyce and Hrgovic, you got two guys who've been right there. They've been at that level, but they're kind of meeting along the way, and that's a really interesting way to look at it, champ.
Chris,
and it's a good point too, because they're right at the same point. They got there in different ways, so that's why I was saying, maybe you can match the winners against each other.
One of the things we keep running into here on Pro Box TV are those contenders that have 12 to 15, 16 fights. They're just coming up, and they always say, we're ready for that phone call, right? You're right in there. Hey, somebody falls out, maybe I step in. Is it a similar kind of thing at the tail end, Chris, where these guys are heavyweights? They have names. Hey, a big heavyweight title shot falls out, these would be one of the guys you called. You're kind of ready for the call. Is that the mentality of the winner of these fights?
Well, I think there's two scenarios where I get where you're talking about, Jimmy. And one scenario is that I'm kind of at my last run at this. I got to be ready for anything. I can't miss the opportunities. I can't delay. I can't push fights off. If a fight comes my way, the opportunities are dwindling. I'm not going to have that many, so I need to be ready all the time. I know a lot of fighters at the end of their career, when they're in their twilight, they were even more disciplined then when they were younger, because they knew at any time they got to answer the call. But then also, second point to why this is occurring is the Saudi money. So you've got heavyweights. Heavyweight money is always great. It's always been better. Heavyweight money, if you got a heavyweight, that's why managers put so much into heavyweights. That's why keeping that O is so important, because you just get them to that place and they make so much more money, exponentially more money than smaller weight classes. But now you've got Riyadh and the Saudis. They love their heavyweights. They started with the heavyweights there. So there's a ton of money coming down. It was who was it? Jerry Forrest fought on our air.
Yep.
And he said, he was like, man, I want that Saudi money. I'm staying ready for whatever. I'll jump in at any moment. I want to get that money. So I think there's a lot of guys, even at the lower level, all the way to the top level, that are seeing those dollar signs being like, man, I got to stay ready for anything.
The Bacoli money, right, Paulie? You know,
Exactly.
Bacoli came off the couch, but then they're doing
Yeah,
nothing.
literally.
Boom.
Well, because when you're heavyweight, you don't have to really be at weight, right? So you can go literally get up off the couch. A guy who fights at a certain weight class, that has to make the weight, can't really get up off his couch. He has to be in some kind of shape to be able to make that weight, unless you're getting somebody who fights at a smaller weight class who will jump up for the opportunity. But with the heavyweights, you can get a Bacoli, which is literally on the couch, and get an opportunity.
And we're hearing for that fight high six figures, right? $700,000, $800,000 for getting off the couch and getting on a plane, right?
Yeah.
Is that, Paul, I'm asking you the same question. Is that the position the winners of these fights might be in? Where you said that they don't have great shine on them, but big heavyweight title fight falls through. Hey, call Hrgovic. He just won. He can step in. Do you have that mentality for these guys, Paulie?
Yeah, you get that, and also you get maybe in the much bigger fights, the loser needs a re-entry fight, and maybe he gets the winner of these kind of fights, where it's like, that this guy's kind of positioned himself, and so you end up at that little bit of a crossroads, and you create those kind of crossroads matchups by those kind of results. And so there's a place for it. There's certainly a place for it.
Well, of course, Oscar De La Hoya, you know how quiet he can be, how little confidence he has. Well, he came out and talked about, of course, the great Times Square fight coming up. It's going to be free in the middle of New York. It's going to be a logistical nightmare. But he is saying he has a great chance of pulling off the hat trick, that all of his guys have a great chance of winning. I want to see if you guys agree. And of course, we're talking about Ryan Garcia, yes, him versus Rolly Romero, Jose Ramirez Jr. versus Devin Haney, and Ronald Barbosa Jr. versus Teofimo Lopez. Chris, I'll start with you. Who has the most chance? Who has the least chance of coming out with a win if you're an Oscar De La Hoya stable that night?
Well, let's start at the top, right?
Yeah.
So Ryan Garcia versus Rolly's, Ryan's going to be the favorite, and not just because of his talent, but because of the size. This is his weight class. We're fighting at 47. Rolly's was fighting at 35, and then 40. He's never even fought at 47 before. So you're gonna lean towards Ryan based on size and also just his physical talent and his profile. Still a fun fight though. So Oscar's probably right about that one. Then you've got Teofimo and Barboza. So Golden Boy Oscar De La Hoya has Barboza, who's recently signed. He was a former top-ranked guy who was chasing Teofimo for all these years. Funny that he's chasing Teofimo. They're on the same promotional banner. Barboza leaves and go to Golden Boy and actually gets the Teofimo fight that he's been wanting for all these years. So it's a really interesting kind of trajectory for the career of Barboza. And we were just talking about this off air. It depends on what version of Teofimo shows up. The Teofimo who shows up less than ready probably loses to Barboza, because Barboza, if nothing else, is consistent. He's not going to wow you, but he'll win by a hair. He doesn't care. It doesn't matter either. It just winning is winning and move on. That's the Barboza style. So if Teo underestimates Barboza, doesn't show up completely locked in, very well could see a Barboza getting a victory over Teofimo Lopez. Then you got Oscar De La Hoya, who's now 2-0 for the show. And then the third fight is Devin Haney versus Jose Ramirez. So that one, I'm certainly leaning towards Devin Haney. I think from what I saw in the Ramirez fight, in terms of his feet being a little stuck in the mud, being a little slow to pull the trigger against Barboza, the inactivity over the years. But there's guys like Mikey Garcia who are saying that, hey, Devin Haney made a mistake. He's fighting a puncher. Ramirez is not the right guy after coming off the Ryan Garcia defeat. So there's the argument for if you're going to see Oscar De La Hoya sweep this with a 3-0. I don't quite think that's going to happen, but Oscar's doing what he's doing. He's putting his promoter hat on, which he does very, very well. Still waiting for that Clap Back Thursday because those are always entertaining. But yeah, right, Oscar's doing Oscar things.
Ollie, are you looking at the inconsistency of these guys? Ryan Garcia, of course, notoriously up and down when it comes to his out of ring activities, things like that. You talk about Devin Haney coming off a loss where he was knocked down 3 times. You talk about Teofimo Lopez, a guy incredibly talented, but doesn't always show up. When you look at this whole card, is it about the question marks surrounding the big names?
Yeah, I think that's what makes you sort of attracted to it, right? Because you would make Haney and Ramirez, not that long ago, you'd say when Haney was on a roll and Ramirez was sort of on the slide, you say, okay, yeah, it's Haney all day. You may still favor Haney here, but now you're thinking, okay, Haney coming off of a fight where he got dropped a few times. How good is his punch resistance? Is his confidence in his punch resistance? What happens if Ramirez lands that shot? It makes for interest in the fight, and that's what you need. You need to build interest in these fights, right? With Teofimo and Barboza, Barboza's been sort of an enigma. He's the guy who has been consistently winning, even if he's not super impressive. He just wins and moves on. Survive and advance, as that 30 for 30 was about the NC State
Yep.
college basketball team, and that's sort of been Barboza's mentality: survive and advance till you get to that championship level. And now he's here, And with Teofimo, the question marks they're there again, like you said, Jimmy. And the question marks with Teofimo is his inconsistency. I mean, he is super inconsistent. You can't really get a gauge. You can't get your finger on the pulse of which Teofimo is going to show up. He can look like one of the most amazing fighters at his best. You talk about enigma. We talk about Barboza being an enigma. Teofimo is a major enigma because he can look like the best fighter you've seen, and then you look like a guy who just you wonder if you started putting on a pair of boxing gloves a week ago. That's the level that we've seen. The differences in levels that we've seen in terms of focus and
he went from champ. It's the widest level of performance I've ever seen. He goes from matching wits with Lomachenko, one of the best of our generation, to fighting Kambosos like they're in a barroom brawl. It was insanity to me. Losing. Right.
Yeah. So that, and again, that brings interest. And of course, Ryan, coming off the failed PED test, and there's footage of the sparring session he and Rolly had on YouTube. A little bit of footage where there's a little bit of give and take there on that in that footage, even though it's incomplete. It's still stuff that intrigues you. And you're saying, okay, that's where you're looking at it. And you say, okay, there's inconsistencies everywhere. This kind of card attracts your attention. It makes you want to watch it. Whether you're watching for the superstars, like the Ryans, the Haneys, the Lopez's, or you're watching for the guys they're fighting who are very good fighters, who could put themselves in a position in those situations where they could be stars if the cards play right for them on that night. They certainly have the talent to cause the upsets. In terms of Oscar saying he's going to sweep the night, he, like the champ said, he's putting on his promoter hat on. That's just something that he's going to say as a promoter, where all his fighters are going to win. He's going to talk up his side. But would I be totally shocked if his guys won? I wouldn't be crazy shocked, but I don't expect it. I'll say that. I don't expect it. But it's not the kind of thing where it's like, oh, I would be totally shocked if Oscar's guys swept. So if Oscar putting on his promoter's hat on and saying something like that, just putting that out there in the universe and putting that energy out there and letting people hear that, if he wants to do that, that's going to promote his stable and it's going to promote his guys anyway.
I have to ask on a personal level there, Chris, because you always talk about, hey, I was a hardworking guy. I wasn't necessarily that talented. I wasn't the fastest guy in the gym. To watch somebody in the sense of a Ryan Garcia, a Teofimo Lopez, maybe a little bit with a Devin Haney, who have all that talent, but not always making the right tactical decisions, not always making the right decisions outside of the ring. How frustrating is that as a former competitor to see, like, God, if you just put it all together, you could be one of the all-time greats. How frustrating is that to watch from the outside? I'm curious.
Well, honestly, with Devin, I don't think he is a super talented guy, and I don't mean that as a knock. Like I said, I don't think I myself as a super physically talented guy. I think Devin's a tremendously hard worker, and he always comes in fantastic shape. We saw him get off the canvas in that Ryan Garcia fight where a lot of guys wouldn't have. So for him, isn't as frustrating for me to watch. Teofimo to me is the real frustration because exactly everything that Champ was saying, he put it perfectly. I mean, he can be so good on any given night. And he can be hard to watch other nights. It doesn't make sense to me. And it's not about being in shape for him. For him, it's about his mind. It's about being in the right headspace to be focused and dialed in. And when that kid's dialed in, man, I don't know. He's literally pound for pound in my book. And with Ryan is he's just such a wild card. He's obviously super talented with that left hook. He's big for the weight classes. He hasn't had that many big victories though for me. With Teofimo, I just look at somebody with that win over Josh Taylor and that win over Vasily Lomachenko, when those guys were very dangerous, really, really makes me look at him and just his career and his style and just go, this is frustrating to watch because he is that good.
Last question, Paul, I got to ask you, the betting man, if I give you 10 grand and said, put this on an upset in one of the 3 fights, of course, where Ostergola has somebody in there, who are you betting on for the upset? If I give you 10 grand.
I can't get 10 grand.
Paul, I can't 10 grand. Only one of us can get 10 grand.
And again, these are still upsets you're talking about. So, upsets, it's not, if I was going to pick one upset that I'd say, okay, maybe could happen because of, I'd say Barboza, because he's been consistently, pretty solid, and Teofimo has been consistently inconsistent. So I would say Barboza would be the guy that, if I was going to pick one upset, if it is to happen on that night, I'd pick Barboza.
That would probably be the widest line too. That would probably be the widest line. So that would be a smart bet.
Probably make you the most money. All right, Chris, because I don't want to be perceived as playing favorites. If you got 10 grand, who are you betting on for the upset? You agree with Mike?
I don't want to do that. I don't want to say the same thing but then that's not as fun. So I'm gonna go with Ramirez. I'm going to say, hey, guess what? Ramirez was killing himself to make 140 at his advanced age in this side of his career. And he's not shot. He was just killed by the weight. And that's why his legs weren't reacting the way they were supposed to on his fight night against Barboza. He comes in at 47 against Haney. He's fresher. He's stronger. He still got it. He still has that lightning left hook and that hard jab. And maybe Devin Haney's chin's not quite there. Could be a smart bet.
Well, so Haney Ramirez at 47?
Yes. I think Teofimo, excuse me. Teofimo and Barboza are 40 because it's for the WBO title. But Haney and Ryan, I believe, are 47.
Well, you heard it. And of course, Oscar De La Hoya bringing back apparently Clapback Thursday, whatever it is, be entertaining. He'll have a lot more to say. And as it makes news, we'll talk about it right here on Boxing Scene Today for the champs, Chris Altieri, Paulie Malignaggi. I'm Jimmy Smith. We'll see you next time. Find out why millions are watching.